Hello, welcome to my studio. My name's Elizabeth Bostick, and today we are painting these two beautiful violet alliums and a couple of soft yellow butterflies. For today's supplies, I'm using 100% cotton paper, the lid of a spice jar, a number 12 round brush, a pencil, masking fluid, and a number 2 round brush that is my dedicated masking fluid brush. For the first step, you'll also want Dawn soap as it coats your masking fluid brush so that you're able to wash off the masking fluid after you are finished. So after I pour about a dime size of Dawn brush, you can pour a smaller size, and about the same size of the masking fluid, I am tracing the lid of my spice jar. And this is, I think it's the Walmart organic spices if you want the same exact lid. And it's about 2 inches in diameter. I make sure I overlap them so the circle in the front is in the foreground, and so I make sure to erase that line that cuts through it really well and then lighten all of the lines. I then coat my brush in the Dawn fluid, the dishwashing soap. You can also rub it on a bar of soap. It doesn't need to be liquid soap. And then I dip it into the masking fluid. And what I'm doing is I am drawing 6 petals, as with the alliums, they're made up of those little teeny tiny flowers that have 6 petals each. You'll be able to see it more clearly once I put the watercolor paint on top. You'll be able to see the shape of these, kind of like a snowflake with the six petals, 6 prongs. So each little flower inside of it gets the 6 petals. And then I make sure that in the areas where I don't have room for all 6 petals, I am putting a petal here and there to make it look like it's nicely filled with those little 6-petaled flowers, so that it doesn't look like I have just the little flowers in the center and then nothing around the sides. I'm putting a petal here and there to make it look like the flowers are going all the way around in a sphere shape. For the next allium, I'm doing the same thing. I sped it up so you don't have to sit through all that, but I'm doing the same thing. And then I wash out my brush, and we are ready for the watercolor part, which this is so much fun to watercolor on top of the masking fluid and see the shapes that you've made. The first color that I'm starting with is the magenta rose, and I made a puddle of water first, and then I'm putting the magenta rose into that water. You can put down the paint first and then add the water to the paint, either way. I just find it's easier for myself to start with a little puddle of water and then add the paint to it, and then you can add more water to your little puddle of color if it's too dark, or more paint to it if you find that it's too thin. So for this initial layer of color, it's pretty thin. It's a good tea consistency of paint, but this color is very bright, so you can still see it kind of shine off the paper really well. It's a very bright, rich color. And as I'm painting, you can see where I have laid down those flower shapes as the paint kind of beads on top of that masking fluid. It's like rubber cement kind of when it's dry. And then once you have gone completely over it, you can add in more color if you find it softer, a softer color than you would like. Once I have it the color that I want, I'm then going right into my violet, and it's just called violet. The color that I have is just named violet. It's the PV23. If you have a set of watercolors that are different from the Rosa Gallery Botanical 28 colors that I'm using, you might be able to match it up exactly if you look at the letters and numbers on your set. But any violet will do. I wouldn't worry about using the same colors at all. And I'm just dabbing that violet into that magenta rose while it's still wet, so it has a nice soft blending effect. I'm also taking away some of the color in areas that I feel that it is too dark or too rich, a little too deep. So while I do want it to be kind of a shadowy, darker violet on the bottom of the allium, I also want it to still be a little bit lighter than what I put down. So I'm taking some of it up and wiping it on the paper towel, and then dabbing in more of that magenta rose to bring back that more of a magenta violet color. And as you can see, it is now dry. I did use a hairdryer to speed up the process. Feel free to use a hairdryer. And then you can also see how much lighter it is when it is dry. So remember that when you're painting, that it will dry a bit lighter than what it looks like when it's wet. And as it is dry, I can go right up to the edge of the alliums. And the edges of the alliums, I made sure that they're not smooth circles, that I'm wiggling the brush and making sure that the edges have a texture to them, so it looks more like there could be little flower petals in there and it's not like a smooth sphere. You want to make sure that the edges have some texture. And I'm doing the same thing as I did with the first one, where first I lay down a layer of magenta rose, and then while it's still wet, I'm dabbing in some of that violet to give it a shadow and the 3D effect. So the lighter area where it's mainly just magenta rose is on the top left-hand side of the alliums, or the top of the alliums, and then it gets darker as you go towards the base, so it gives it a look of the sun shining on it. After they are dry, and again I use the hairdryer to speed it up a bit, I'm using the masking fluid remover, which is just a chunk of all natural rubber that I think I found on Amazon. You can also find it in your local craft store. And I'm just gently rubbing that dried masking fluid, and it comes right up. It turns into like a little ball of rubber cement, kind of, just a little ball of masking fluid. It's very easy to remove. It doesn't harm your paper at all. And once you see it removed, you can see really clearly the shape of those little tiny flowers in there. They just have 6 petals each. A couple might have 5 on accident, but I tried to make them all have 6. And you can leave it like that if you like a more stylized look. But I decided that I wanted it to kind of be a combination of a more stylized look and a more natural, realistic look. So I'm creating a mixture or a wash using that violet with more of the magenta rose. So I'm making a lighter wash than the shadows that are there. That way you'll be able to see those petals coming through. So I'm masking them a bit with a transparent layer of, or a transparent wash of magenta rose and violet, so that once it's dry, the shape of the petals comes through still, but it's not so stylized where it looks more like a wood block print or a fabric pattern. Not that there's anything wrong with either. Those are both beautiful. It's just not the look that I was going for with these. And then while that layer of the magenta rose is still wet, I'm dabbing in some more of that darker violet to give it a really nice, dark, deep shadow. Once the first allium is dry, I used a hairdryer again to speed up the process. I mixed up the same magenta rose and violet to make a layer to soften the look of those petals on the second allium as well. Once I have that full allium covered with that second layer, then I go in and mix up mostly violet with a little bit of the magenta rose and dab it in as well towards the base of the allium to give it more shading, and then I dab in some more violet that is mostly just the pure violet right in there as well to give it a little more texture and more shading as well. Once both of the alliums are dry, I mix up my favorite green combination or favorite green mix, which is using the emerald green and the burnt sienna that I like to mix together. You can use any green that you'd like. This just happens to be what I've been really excited about these days is this combination of the emerald green and the burnt sienna. I take that combination of emerald green and burnt sienna, and I have drawn a pencil line for where I want the stem to be, and I'm just following that pencil line for both of the stems. Sometimes I can make a stem in one swoop down, and other times, like today, I do it just little bit by little bit. Either way works just fine. I do tend to have thicker lines though when I go little bit by little bit, or thicker paint. So after I finish painting the stem in, I do take the paper towel and I lay it down very gently on top, and then using my hand press down right on top of where I want the paper towel to soak back up some of that paint. And I take some of it up to lighten the color, because one of my favorite things about watercolor is layering, and I do want to be able to layer other colors on top of the screen without it becoming too thick and losing that transparent etheric quality that I just love about watercolor. So I add a bit more water to the screen, which I should have done in the first place perhaps, is add more water to the color. As you see, I made a second little puddle of the green where there is more water and less of the paint. So it gives a much thinner wash, and you're able to still see the paper through the paint. It's not too thick. And then the next step is to draw in the butterfly, which the butterflies, I'm not painting them in a very realistic manner. I'm just wanting to get their more of a simplified butterfly, where it gives you the idea of a butterfly and it's not very detailed at all. So it's mainly just two rounded triangles, one on top of the other. And you can paint whatever kind of butterfly you want. If you want it more detailed, if you want to go for swallowtail butterfly, or any kind of butterfly you want, I think would look beautiful. And then after finishing the butterfly sketches, the stems are now dry, so I'm going back on top of those stems with a mixture of the cadmium deep yellow, I believe it is. Or no, first actually I used the cadmium yellow light. So this is a cadmium yellow light mixed in with my combination green that I made up. And you can use any lighter, more yellowy green for this, or just stick with that green that you used in the first place. You don't need to layer your stem. I just always have a fun time with the layering of watercolors, as I think it adds so much to the watercolor when you can see the different colors, the different layers, playing with them, using the blues and the yellows. I just have a lot of fun with that. But you can use whatever green you want, layering, no layering. Just have fun with it, whatever you think looks best. I then add a little bit of the ultramarine blue right from the pan. So it's a blue that I'm adding while some of the green is still wet, but it's kind of a drier stem. It's not super wet, so it's not spreading out into the green. It's mostly staying right where I put it, so it looks like a more of a intense shadow just right underneath the ball of the allium and then going down the stem on the right hand side just a little bit to give it more of a 3D effect. I then wash off the brush and go into that cadmium yellow light. But first, lighten up the lines with the kneaded eraser. If you don't have a kneaded eraser yet, they are just fantastic to use with watercolor, as you can use them to lighten up your lines very, very gently without disturbing your watercolor paper. So I've lightened up my lines, and now I've made a little puddle of yellow, a little yellow wash, and it's a very thin yellow wash, so mostly water and just a little tiny bit of yellow, which you can see how light it is showing on the paper, and then it will lighten up just a little bit as it dries as well. So at first I thought that I wanted to have super light yellow butterflies, but then I looked back on my sketch that I did in color, and I decided I wanted more of a brighter yellow. So in a little bit I will be going back in with a brighter yellow and a brighter orange, or actually this I'm using right now is called cadmium red light. And I thought that I had grabbed the cadmium orange, but I actually had grabbed the cadmium red light, which is kind of a orangey red. So this first layer for the butterflies, I'm adding in this cadmium red light while the yellow is still wet. That way it allows it to dry with a very soft drawing line. And then before it's dry, I'm wiping the water and the paint off of my brush, and I'm going in and I'm softening and blending the yellow and the cadmium red light together to make more of an orange. All I am doing to accomplish this is just moving the brush in that not yet dried color very gently, and you're able to manipulate your still wet paint to blend it and kind of move it around where it is still wet. So now I have changed out the cadmium yellow light and the cadmium red light for the cadmium deep yellow and the cadmium orange, as I've waited for the butterflies to dry. And I've decided that they're just a little bit too light. I wanted them to pop off the page a little bit more. I wanted them to feel kind of like sunshine and happiness. So I'm adding some of that cadmium deep yellow. And then while that cadmium deep yellow is still wet, I will be adding in the cadmium orange just the same way that I had earlier added in that cadmium red light. While the yellow is still wet, just adding it right around kind of the outline of the butterfly, and then into that area where the two parts of the wing kind of overlap. I added a bit of that orange in there as well while it's still wet, so it gives it a bit of definition without giving it a lot of definition, as I don't want these butterflies to be illustrative or too detailed, as I'm hoping to keep them more simple and to just give you that idea of a butterfly without giving you the details of the butterfly. So I'm not trying to make it realistic, more just a simplified version of the butterfly. Once the butterflies are dry, I'm going in with just a teeny tiny bit of that burnt sienna on the very tip of the brush and going over just a little hint of a butterfly's body. And then when that's dry, I'm taking a pencil and going over the antenna with just the pencil for now. You can take a teeny tiny brush, maybe a size 0 round brush or a liner brush, and you can go over your pencil line for the antenna and paint that in, but I chose just to leave it with the pencil lines as I don't mind that look at all. I also put in a couple of little legs for each butterfly. I ended up turning this watercolor into a Mother's Day card, as Mother's Day was just around the corner, and my friends and family seem to not mind my handwriting too much and appreciate the hand-painted cards, so I add a little bit of the painter's metallic gold pen to go over the Happy Mother's Day, and a little bit to the butterfly's antenna as well. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you next time.